And what we have seen is that operations and the education around what operations should look like for an electrified fleet has been a little lacking. There's not a lot of information about the things that you need to learn as a fleet manager, as a fleet owner, for how you change operations, what operational protocols you need to implement. What we've seen is there are really kind of four pillars that if you focus on, you can have really, really good electric fleet operations. Um, Three of those are actually related to operations. One of them is at the very beginning, procurement. I have seen two fleets with near identical vehicle charger setups in the same service territory, roughly the same routes, and one of them will have double the monthly operating costs as the other. And it really comes down to what operational guidelines they have set up. So I'm going to be talking through these four pillars: cost management, performance optimization, just having operational intelligence. This is kind of just data visibility. And then, having a really smart procurement process. That there are three kind of main questions that you need to ask during a procurement, which is, for your charger, are you OCPP compatible or are you compliant? Like, what is the level of compliance that you are following for that protocol? The second is, are you white labeling or reselling another vendor's hardware? If that's the case, what control do you have over firmware updates, over how that hardware performs? It's not necessarily a bad thing that people are reselling other hardware, but the level of control and access that that reseller has is super important if things go wrong. And then you should start with the vehicle. Ask the vehicle for a list of certified chargers and then go out and buy one of those chargers. So smart charging for cost reduction. This can be very complicated, but put simply, it's just charging off peak and then managing what your maximum load is. So this is data from the same fleet before and after implementing some smart charging. Um, Before they had implemented it, I mean, it was nearly $15,000 every month. And a lot of that was demand charges because they were getting back, around 4 to 5 p.m. This was during peak period. They were getting hit with $20 per kilowatt of load that they had, and also charging at the largest dollar per kilowatt hour period. After implementing smart charging, you can kind of see what that graph looks like. Um, Drivers are still able to see that charging starts. They're still able to get visibility on what vehicles are charging. But the load and the rate that those vehicles charge at is greatly, greatly reduced. So this is software that can kind of limit the maximum amount that you're charging at a site until we kind of see at that, 11 p.m. period, we suddenly spike. We're charging at 100% because we no longer are going to get hit with $20 per kilowatt of load. And electricity is now super cheap. So that's kind of a massive reduction with a fairly simple implementation, just charging off peak, managing what your peak load looks like. So there are two things that you can do with smart charging that we've seen fleets really get a ton of benefit from. The first is just optimizing for battery health and longevity. I think a lot of people know that you want to be between that 20 to 80% range. If you don't have smart charging to cut it off at 80%, or your vehicle doesn't automatically cut it off at 80%, in the evening, you're not really able to stop it. What we've seen is that limiting to 80%, if you can get away with it, sometimes even less, can really extend the lifespan of that battery. Now, 3, 4, 5+ years, this doesn't really have an impact if your duty replacement cycle is 10-ish years, along those lines. But the impact that you do see is you get essentially the same range in year 10 before you replace it as you would on year one. And then the second one is cold weather performance. We work with school districts in pretty North Michigan. It gets very cold for them, and we know that cold weather impacts EV performance, right? It can cut range by a good bit. With smart charging, what you're able to do is things like preconditioning, where you actually warm up the battery before it goes out on its route. In some cases, you can actually warm up the cabin of the vehicle before it goes out on its route. And from what we've seen, you can get up to 40% extra range in the winter by doing this. And this is kind of just a smart charging setting that you can enable, and suddenly just like having the same range from year 1 to year 10 with setting that max charge, you're now getting essentially the same range in the summer and the winter just by having this preconditioning setting live. This is something that there isn't a lot of data on, actually. We are actively doing a research project with Michigan State University to be able to share the impact of this and data on this. So I'm really excited to be able to get that data out. I think something that's really important is having a single, maybe two pieces of data connectivity where you can see that a vehicle is plugged into a charger and charging. Being able to see this from your phone, from your laptop, your iPad, whatever, it really, really impacts how smooth things can feel. There's range anxiety, there's operational anxiety, and tools that give you visibility into what your vehicles and chargers are doing can really take that anxiety away. So as far as kind of reports that we think people should have, kind of comes down to three. The main one is an admin report, a cost breakdown report. This is a per vehicle, per charger, per site breakdown on how much you're charging, when you're charging, what mileage your vehicles are getting, things like that. How much it's costing you to run for those miles. The reason why this is important is because as you start doing things like driver training around regenerative braking, you can start to actually see that mileage stay the same, but your per mile cost reports on what chargers are being used when can give you call outs like, hey, you have a charger at this depot that really isn't being used that much. You could electrify further without the need for more infrastructure upgrades. So this is something that's super, super important, understanding your utilization rates for your chargers. And then the third one is kind of a fault analysis. There are so many things that can go wrong in charging operations. Understanding what's going wrong when and trying to find those trends is invaluable. We've really seen that there are only two categories that really, really matter for driver training. It's the charger handshake and regenerative braking. The handshake is super, super key. Whether it's the sounds, the lights, if drivers have access to a mobile app where they can see the handshake be successful, this is incredibly important. I want to say 90% of the issues that we've seen in the field have simply been a handshake not being successful. It could be the vehicle rejecting it, the charger rejecting it, the software having an issue, understanding what a handshake success means, and knowing that, hey, if this doesn't work, I probably just need to unplug it and replug it. It's the classic IT thing, right? If it doesn't work, just turn it off and turn it back on again. So not every issue that you run into requires a technician on site. You can save a lot of money just simply by being able to remotely reset your charger. GridLink helps at every stage here. Our software automates the process of optimizing for cost of charge, keeping chargers online. If things fault in the middle of the night, we remotely restart it. We essentially do everything I've talked about so far, except for having a smart procurement process and driver training. That's really why this software was started, is you need really smart software that can figure out all of the protocols and manage it for you so that you can focus on vehicles driving, because that's what the vehicles are supposed to do.